It happened quietly, almost too quietly. The crypto world, accustomed to drama and noise, suddenly found itself stunned by silence. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, after months of posturing, allegations, and courtroom threats against Binance, withdrew. The lawsuit, that had once loomed like a thundercloud over the entire digital asset industry, simply vanished. No press conference, no apology, no explanation, just a legal vacuum where there was once a war. Traders stared at their screens in disbelief. Bitcoin flickered green. News outlets scrambled for context. But there was no clear answer, only the growing realization that something monumental had just shifted beneath the surface. What began as a government crusade against the biggest exchange in the world ended as an invisible handshake behind closed doors. The world's most powerful regulator had just blinked, and the consequences rippled far beyond Binance's headquarters. For months, fear had defined the market. Exchanges tightened their operations. Investors hesitated. Developers froze projects mid-launch. Now, suddenly, the barrier that had frozen progress was gone, and in its place, a new form of freedom. One that didn't feel earned, but taken. The SEC had painted Binance as the villain of a trillion-dollar story, a reckless empire built on defiance. Every headline read like a prophecy. Binance faces collapse. CZ'd under pressure. Regulators close in. Yet, for all the noise, Binance moved like a ghost, shifting assets, changing leadership, and quietly building backup structures in jurisdictions the SEC couldn't touch. While the public panicked, Binance was laying bricks in silence, constructing a global fortress where the laws of one nation couldn't dictate the destiny of billions in capital. By the time regulators realized it, Binance had outgrown their reach. Its ecosystem stretched across continents, connected by liquidity, code, and an army of users who refused to abandon it. The lawsuit became a political statement rather than a legal battle. The SEC wanted to make an example of Binance. Instead, it exposed how powerless traditional systems truly are against decentralized networks of capital and code. The storm everyone expected never landed because its target was no longer standing in one place. It was everywhere, at once. No major regulatory decision happens in isolation. The dismissal of the Binance lawsuit wasn't just a courtroom move, it was a political calculation. Behind the curtains of Washington, financial lobbyists, tech advisors, and election strategists had been clashing over one fundamental question. Do you fight the future, or do you join it? Crypto had gone from a niche movement to a political force. Millions of American voters now owned digital assets, and honestly, alienating them in an election year was suicide. The SEC's sudden silence reflected something deeper, a shift in the winds of influence. When politics meets profit, regulation becomes negotiable. The United States couldn't afford to appear hostile toward innovation while competitors like Dubai, Singapore, and Hong Kong opened their doors to blockchain projects. The reversal wasn't mercy, it was momentum. Binance wasn't just a company under siege, it was a symbol of what happens when power decentralizes faster than governments can legislate. Binance's survival was not luck, it was engineering. Every time regulators thought they had the upper hand, Binance was already 3 moves ahead. When China banned crypto, Binance didn't crumble, it became global. When Western regulators demanded compliance, it hired former law enforcement officials and built regional entities that looked, on paper, like separate companies. What looked like chaos was actually strategy, a system designed to be impossible to kill. Binance's founder, Changpeng Zhao, understood one thing better than anyone else. Adaptability is the real currency of survival. Each crisis became a testing ground for resilience. When banks cut ties, Binance created new fiat on-ramps. When regulators demanded transparency, Binance built systems that gave just enough visibility to satisfy scrutiny without exposing its full architecture. By the time the SEC came knocking, Binance was no longer an exchange, it was an ecosystem. And ecosystems don't collapse, they evolve. Whenever markets shake, someone always benefits first. The dismissal of the Binance case wasn't an exception, it was a masterclass in timing. Hours before the news broke, whale wallets began to stir. Billions in stablecoins shifted across exchanges. Trading volumes spiked quietly, without reason. Those who knew what was coming had already positioned themselves, ready to ride the wave of euphoria that would follow. By the time the public red lawsuit dropped, insiders were already cashing profits. This is the hidden game of regulation. It's not about justice, it's about information flow. In traditional markets, insider trading is a crime. In crypto, it's a daily ritual. The blockchain may be transparent, but influence is not. The same people who shape the laws often profit from their enforcement or reversal. The Binance case proved that the line between regulator and participant is thinner than anyone dares to admit. When the news finally broke, it felt like an earthquake. Bitcoin's price exploded. BNB surged. Traders who had gone into hiding re-emerged overnight. The fear that had paralyzed the market melted into adrenaline. Across the globe, exchanges saw record traffic, and liquidity flooded back into the system like blood returning to a body. Binance, once painted as the face of crypto's downfall, was suddenly its savior again. But the rally wasn't just financial, it was emotional. The crypto community had been living under siege for years, painted as outlaws in a digital frontier that regulators refused to understand. The dismissal of the case wasn't just relief, it was validation. For a moment people believed again not in Binance but in the idea that crypto could survive anything. Yet beneath that euphoria, a question lingered. If justice could vanish overnight, what else could? The fall of the Binance case set a precedent that regulators will spend years trying to undo. It showed that even the most powerful financial authorities in the world could be forced to retreat when they overplay their hand. This wasn't a victory for transparency. It was a victory for endurance. Binance had proven that survival itself was a strategy. If you could outlast the system, you didn't need to win in court. Time would do it for you. But that lesson cuts both ways. For smaller firms, it created a false sense of invincibility. Suddenly, every project under investigation believed it could outweigh regulation. The reality, however, is harsher. Binance had global scale, political leverage, and near unlimited resources. Most others don't. The case's dismissal didn't end regulation, it simply changed how it's played. From now on, enforcement will be quieter, more calculated, and far less predictable. Every power shift creates imbalance. Binance's victory solidified its dominance, but also reshaped the competitive landscape. Smaller exchanges, once proud of their compliance-first strategies, looked timid and over-regulated in comparison. Institutions that had stayed on the sidelines, fearing regulatory risk, began pouring capital back into the space. Meanwhile, retail investors, the ones who panic-sold during the lawsuit, found themselves watching from the sidelines as prices recovered without them. Crypto is a battlefield, and survival rewards the ruthless. Binance didn't just win a legal battle, it consolidated global trust through resilience. The irony is poetic. The company accused of evading regulation became the symbol of crypto's legitimacy. In the end, markets don't reward virtue, they reward results. Even as Binance celebrated, a deeper unease began to spread. The lawsuit's dismissal didn't erase the questions, it actually amplified them. Why was the case dropped? Who made that call? And, what did Binance give up behind closed doors to make it happen? Trust in the system, already fragile, began to erode. Traders realized that the line between enforcement and negotiation was vanishing. Yet, paradoxically, this erosion of trust became crypto's strength. The industry has always thrived in skepticism. The very reason blockchain exists is because people no longer trust centralized power. Binance's victory didn't restore faith in regulation, it reignited belief in decentralization. If governments can rewrite the rules overnight, then the only true safety lies in self-custody and code. For institutional investors, regulation isn't a moral battleground, it's a data point. Every lawsuit, ban, or dismissal becomes part of a predictive model for profit. The SEC's reversal sent a clear message to the whales: the market was safe again. Capital that had been sitting idle flooded back in, pushing prices upward before retail traders even noticed the shift. This is how the elite play the game. They don't watch the news for headlines, they watch the regulators for hesitation. The moment uncertainty becomes clarity, they move. To them, regulation isn't an obstacle, it's a map of opportunity. The Binance dismissal wasn't just a signal of relief, it was a declaration that the next bull cycle had already begun. The shockwaves from the dismissal rippled across global politics. European regulators, once emboldened by the United States crackdown, softened their tone. Asian governments, watching from the sidelines, saw their chance to position themselves as the next crypto capitals. Even United States lawmakers began shifting their rhetoric, calling for balanced innovation rather than strict enforcement. Crypto had become a geopolitical tool. The countries that embraced it gained capital, talent, and innovation. The ones that resisted fell behind. The United States, realizing its overreach, began quietly pivoting from hostility to cooperation. The Binance case wasn't just a legal event. It's what it do, pretty das, omarijan pao, and asenan. To the world that America's regulatory dominance had limits. Freedom always invites chaos. With the SEC on pause and regulators hesitant, the market opened like a floodgate. New projects launched daily, token prices surged overnight, scams resurfaced under the disguise of innovation. The ecosystem, for all its brilliance, returned to its roots. A mix of genius and greed. For veterans, this was familiar territory. The absence of regulation always breeds both opportunity and danger. Binance's survival had proven that crypto couldn't be killed, but it also revealed that it couldn't be fully contained. In this new landscape, manipulation didn't need to hide. It simply wore the mask of momentum. Retail traders, the lifeblood of crypto markets, found themselves once again at the mercy of forces they couldn't see. During the lawsuit, they fled in fear. After the dismissal, they returned in hope. But in both cases, they were late. The markets moved too fast, the insiders too early. This is the eternal tragedy of the retail investor. They are always reacting to a story someone else already wrote. Binance's victory reignited optimism, but it also revealed the structural inequality of information. Retail may have access to blockchain data, but they don't have access to the conversations that shape policy, or the trades that move billions. In crypto's decentralized dream, centralization still exists, just in new forms of power. The SEC's silence after the case was deafening. No statement, no rationale, no closure. That silence became its own message. It told the world that the regulator wasn't confident, wasn't united, and perhaps wasn't in control. To some, it looked like strategic retreat. To others, it felt like surrender. But one thing was undeniable: the myth of regulatory omnipotence had been shattered. Behind the scenes, the SEC was likely regrouping, learning from its overreach, preparing for smarter, subtler forms of control. Publicly, it stayed quiet to preserve dignity, but internally, the message had changed. Brute force regulation was dead. From now on, influence would replace intimidation. In the months that followed, a new balance emerged. Binance stood taller than ever, not because it was untouchable, but because it had become indispensable. It wasn't just an exchange anymore, it was infrastructure. The dismissal marked the end of crypto's underdog era, and the beginning of its institutional phase. Traditional finance began creeping in deeper. Hedge funds, asset managers, and corporate treasuries now viewed crypto not as rebellion, but as revenue. What began as a decentralized revolution was being absorbed by the very system it once sought to replace. The war between freedom and control didn't end, it simply changed form. The Binance case proved a truth that regulators will never say out loud. Control is an illusion. Governments can slow crypto, but they can't stop it. Exchanges can be sued, fined, or even banned, but as long as the code exists, so does the market. What changed after the dismissal wasn't regulation, but confidence. The fear that once gripped the industry dissolved, replaced by a new realism. Crypto isn't an enemy of the system. It is the system, evolving faster than the laws that try to define it. In the end, Binance didn't win against the SEC, it outlasted it. time, adaptability, and scale became its weapons, the crypto world learned that freedom isn't declared by ideology, it's maintained through resilience. The regulators will return, as they always do, armed with new rules and new ambitions. But now, the industry knows how to survive them. The real victory wasn't in the courtroom, it was in the conviction that decentralization doesn't need permission to exist.